So one of the good things about not only having a guest like you on, but also having people like Bernie Sanders at the rally and people talking about the debates, people talking about democratic socialism, I think that a lot of Americans don't really have any familiarity with the subject, what it really means. To the extent that they've heard anything about it, they've heard it from Brian Kilmeade, and it's probably flawed in some fundamental ways. So I guess I'm curious, I want people to understand more of this tradition, and part of it has to do with the relationship between people more authentically on the left and more traditional liberals, of which people are really familiar with. Can you talk a little bit about the critique and the frustration going towards more mainstream liberal Democrats?
So the core, I guess maybe it might be easier to just briefly say what the core premise of democratic socialism is, which is at the very least, there's certain things in life that shouldn't be dependent on your ability to pay. You're having healthcare, having a good education, having access to childcare, housing, nutrition. These things in our society are too often dependent on your ability to pay. It's too often dependent on where you're from, what quality, kind of access you have, and too much of life just in general is dependent on accidents of birth. And democratic socialists want to change that situation and decommodify certain sectors of the economy to really make what the basics of life and the basics of us reaching our potential, to make these things accessible to all people. Now, when it comes to elements of liberals, certainly a lot of liberals, especially in this Democratic candidacy during the primaries, have been saying the right things on certain issues. Many people have been saying, Elizabeth Warren's of the world, Kamala Harris's of the world have been saying, all right, we're for universal health care, we're for Medicare for all, and all these other things. One of my questions that I have about liberalism isn't that we can maybe force them or encourage them to adopt certain progressive positions, but can we encourage them to actually take the view of the world that says there are actually people we need to fight, and there's actually a deep form of organization we need to do to actually accomplish these things. And it seems to me that Bernie Sanders has the most dynamic theory of power in politics. And I think that's one thing that's often missing in liberalism. But don't get me wrong, democratic socialists can't go it alone. We're a growing movement. We encompass tens of thousands of people now in this country. But in order to make change, we're going to need to galvanize millions of people who might share our egalitarian values, who might want to see a better country, but who do not now or perhaps never will call themselves democratic socialists. So we need to be building coalitions to a broader progressive community as well.
I want to ask just one follow-up there, because obviously we sort of agree that Bernie Sanders is apart from these other candidates. And as you pointed out, there are a lot of candidates who everybody's saying they're a progressive at this point, except I guess maybe Hickenlooper, I don't know. They all say it. And so it really gets down to a question of what are they proposing and how much do we believe them? Do we believe that they would actually do what they say and that they would fight for it with the vigor that we expect and that we expect that Bernie Sanders would? And so I'm curious, I feel like out of that pack, Elizabeth Warren certainly has been making those claims for longer than, say, a Cory Booker or a Kamala Harris. Do you see her as fundamentally being a part of that pack, though?
Yeah, I think Warren has been very good on many things. I think if I was to nitpick about her worldview compared to the Sanders worldview, I would say that she might see more politics as a collection of progressive policy platforms. And in other words, she might be someone who's going to try to figure out how to regulate the rules of the game as opposed to maybe questioning some of the fundamental nature of the rules of the game. But I think people like Warren and people who support Warren instead of Sanders, there's many good reasons why people might support Elizabeth Warren. I mean, we should all be part of the same broad coalition. We should focus our fire on the real enemies, and we should be prepared to support, the candidate that ends up winning. I think there are fundamental differences between the two. I am much more enthused about the prospect of a Sanders administration. And I also think that a Sanders administration has the potential to be a galvanizing force in society as a whole. So in other words, can we imagine a wave of public sector unions going on strike inspired by a Sanders administration? Kind of just like FDR in the 1930s, radicals could say, your president wants you to go on strike. Can we imagine kind of people taking the existing embryos in our revolution and DSA chapters and things like that, and actually turning them into real vehicles to get people, everyday people involved in politics, people who right now, are enthusiastic about many individual progressive measures, but who don't have the time, who don't feel like they're really think of themselves as political actors. And I think getting these people involved in politics is how we change America. And I worry that with a Warren administration, she'll herself have the best of intentions, but we might keep too much of the existing Democratic establishment policy apparatus and also the old way of going about political change despite her best intentions and not because she's kind of herself a neoliberal or whatever else.
Bhaskar, I share your concerns, and I want to thank you again for joining us. The book is The Socialist Manifesto, The Case for Radical Politics in an Era of Extreme Inequality. Thank you so much for joining us. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.